Okay, welcome everyone to the WEI Tech Talk podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Murphy. I'm a cybersecurity solutions architect here at WEI. And today I'm joined by a very special guest. I'm super excited to have Patrick Hynds join. Thank you so much, Patrick. The agenda for the podcast today is going to be AI. AI, what? No, we're not talking about AI today. Today we get to talk about
We can.
quantum. I feel like everyone's been beat over the head with AI, so I'm super excited to cover the topic of quantum computing and its impact on encryption and cybersecurity. Just some ground rules before we launch into the very dynamic conversation that I expect to unfold. We're not going to cover uh, the basics of quantum mechanics on this podcast. I think we need to, as Patrick put it, suspend disbelief about quantum weirdness because it is quite weird. I will say I studied physics in undergrad and I went down the path of string theory, which is I think even more weird because you have to conceptualize 15 different dimensions. But quantum's got its own weirdness. But we're going to suspend that disbelief and we're going to cut to the chase and talk about the impact of quantum computing on what we all do and care about in the cybersecurity field.
I,
So,
I think you
uh,
just saved us hundreds of hours
hundreds of hours on
by saying that. We just saved hundreds of hours of discussion. So
exactly. Well, there's a risk that we do this again sometime and we pick up that topic.
cool.
So yeah, in that vein, I wanted to start very high level with the risks. I've heard the term Q day or Y2Q. Patrick, do you want to just give us a lay of the land about what could potentially break, assuming
Yeah.
quantum computers
So
do
so
what they would say they can
so
do?
so so let's say we have an analogy that, you have a car, most of us have cars, and there's a recall, but they're not going to do anything about it because there's nothing wrong with the brakes yet. But eventually, at some point, within the not too distant future, while you're still using the car for sure, the brakes are just going to cease to work.
Hmm.
And you're going to have to deal with that. And they're not willing to do anything about it. Well, that's where we are with quantum because we know that quantum computers are evolving and developing. And some people might refute, well, we're never going to get to a big enough quantum computer. And past events are showing that that's probably, mistaken. So again, suspend disbelief and say we're going to get sufficiently powerful quantum computers to fulfill what's called not Moore's law. Oh, I almost went the wrong way. Shor's algorithm. So Dr. Peter Shor, MIT mathematics professor, came up with a way to use a sufficiently large quantum computer, not a very large one, like a medium-sized one, to break all the encryption that we use for key distribution today. So what that means is RSA protocol, RSA 2048, Diffie-Hellman, elliptical curve. They all are based on the discrete log problem, which is an algebraic problem of take two really large prime numbers, you multiply them together, and then you derive from that two secret numbers, one for encrypting, one for decrypting, and they're related to each other. But finding that relation is very, very, very hard, takes millions, if not trillions of years for a classical computer to do. And that's what makes our encryption safe when we talk about asymmetric encryption. Now,
Yeah.
if that time comes in 2030, the problem isn't that, oh, from then on you have to be ready. It's known that there are threat actors, and China is almost always the one cited, who are gathering encrypted data, grabbing the keys in the hopes that in some future time, maybe a few years, maybe a decade, they'll be able to decrypt that data. And if your data is what stock trade you're doing in the next 5 minutes, it doesn't matter. But if it's where the missile silos are, it matters. You want the encryption that protects them to be durable. And so the clock is already ticking. Even if the brakes don't go out next week, we really should fix them this week.
Yeah, I want to dig into the geopolitical context of this in a little bit more detail, but just to reiterate this analogy of the brakes going out in the car, the way that a traditional computer would try and crack the asymmetric key distribution protocols that we use today is through trial and error, right?
Brute force.
It's just going to try over and over again until it finds the two prime numbers that were factored together
And
and
then
then
it's very quick.
yeah. Yeah. But how does quantum computing change that paradigm? How is it different from a traditional computer?
So this is where the believe that Superman can fly part of the discussion. So what Shore realized is that if you used a Fourier transform, and a Fourier transform is like a cyclical transform that is very good for dealing with sound. So when you do sound processing, Fourier transforms are in there. And he realized if he had a quantum Fourier transform with a quantum computer, he could break down the problem and get one little bit of a hint out of it. And that hint would take it from a number that we don't have a name for combinations to try to maybe just hundreds of trillions or gazillions if that's a word, but it's still a small enough number that a classical computer could get it within a day or even minutes. And what it is when you're building, like if you take RSA for example, there's a mathematical set of operations that create that encryption, the key that used for encoding and the key that's used for decrypting. One of the choices is you have to pick the order, because what happens is the numbers repeat and you have to pick which family of numbers you're going to pull your values out of. If you know the order, then this problem shrinks from enormous to all the sand in the beach to all the sand in a bottle.
Hmm,
Okay.
interesting.
So what the Shor's algorithm does is it does order finding. It is able to inhabit all the potential orders and find the one that was used. And then with that hint, a classical computer can go brute force it in very short period of time. And so
Got it.
it's estimated that with enough qubits, logical qubits, we can get into that too. You can run this against a RSA 2048, a 2048-bit RSA encryption, which is considered to take trillions of years for a classical computer, even the most powerful classical computer, to break. And you can uh, solve it in minutes or a day or less. Now,
Wow.
that how many qubits is actually in dispute right now. Some people think it's tens of thousands, some people think it's a million, but there are definitely companies that are on the path and making their explicit goal to get to a million logical qubits. And so if you've got billions and trillions of dollars being spent to get there, I think we're going to get there.
Mm, okay. Okay, so that helps understand the risk to our encryption technology that we use today. I was doing some research and I kind of bucketed out the different types of technology that we use every day and depend on
Yeah.
that use this type of encryption.
Yeah.
And I was sort of I was new to the internet when we had HTTP and we were just loading up websites and there was no encryption at the time and people thought, it doesn't need to be encrypted. I want to just publish this information. Uh, but now everything is encrypted, especially
Yeah.
with the Let's Encrypt project that makes getting TLS certificates super easy and automated and
Yeah.
there's privacy reasons for that as well as security reasons for it. But just, loading up a web browser, every page is going to be TLS encrypted. Your browser won't let you go to
Yeah.
HTTP websites anymore without clicking through a bunch of warning
Yeah.
dialogues. The Bitcoin technology depends entirely on this problem. That's why people have, huge GPU clusters that are trying to factor because they're trying to solve that problem of factorization, which quantum computers make easy. VPN technology. So if you're connecting to a network securely and you're accessing critical applications over a VPN tunnel, all of that, the keys are exchanged using asymmetric protocols. Random number generators. This is something that I didn't really think of, but the idea that when you're like at a casino, for example, when you plug in a random number generator to a slot machine, apparently quantum computers can also make that problem easier.
Well, because they're only pseudo random.
Right,
And so
exactly.
yes, they can. So you brought up something very important. If I can digress here, you
Yeah.
mentioned, and you being an expert in this field, also, you and I can easily take this for granted, but it's worth mentioning. You mentioned asymmetric encryption, and that's exactly right. Asymmetric encryption is the part of encryption that has to happen at the beginning of things, typically. So let's say you and I have a secret document we want to keep, and we meet each other and we say the password is going to be Scotch tape, Eagle 5123. Not a great password, but not a bad password. Longer is better. And we share that password face to face. We can now symmetrically encrypt that file, and you already know the password. So if I pass the file to you, I don't have to communicate that key to you. Most of the internet's content is encrypted symmetrically. All the files that are encrypted on a disk, because it's very good at encrypting large things.
It's very
But
performant, right?
but what if we can't get together, which is the case most of the time? All the examples you gave are examples where I'm not going to meet you face to face to say, I would like to buy that sweater.
Hmm.
I'm going to do it over the internet. Well, to do it over the internet, you need protocols like TLS, which rely on RSA, Diffie-Hellman elliptical curve, and they are asymmetric. So asymmetric encryption is all about us sharing a key without seeing each other, without being at the same place with each other. And that's what's at risk. And so a lot of companies will take a look at their solution and they'll say, well, we're using symmetric encryption everywhere. All our files are encrypted here. We're not using asymmetric encryption, but they're not looking at the beginning of the process. And so one of the things that we're going to recommend during this talk is that you inventory your uses exactly as you were describing. Inventory your uses of encryption and find out where you're using asymmetric. The problem is 99% of encryption that we use is symmetric, but it's all
Hmm.
based on a key that was exchanged through asymmetric.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
that's the gotcha. And so it's like a needle in a haystack for most enterprises.
Yeah. Yep. I love the asymmetric symmetric encryption and the strengths and weaknesses of the two. And they do work really well together because you wouldn't want to encrypt an entire web page with asymmetrically generated keys. But it's really easy to use asymmetric protocols to exchange a symmetric key, and it's more performant and
Most of the protocols don't even have size limits that would preclude that. So
mhm,
they really do complement each other very, very well. But now we have this weakness that we never thought. Now, one of the things that we should also remember is at any point in the history of RSA and elliptical curve and Diffie-Hellman, some smart mathematician could have come up with an idea that allows a classical computer or even a slide rule to solve this problem. And we just
mhm,
didn't. And we counted on it not happening. So we're very fortunate that Shor didn't come up with his algorithm 5 years after the first medium-sized quantum computer was on the market, because then the problem would be instant. All
mhm.
encryption would be open. That's always a threat with encryption standards, that somebody finds a way to solve it while we're using it. So we're lucky that we figured it out beforehand. So now we can and there are measures we can take to mitigate this already.
Yeah, and I'd like to get to that. I want to end on that note. What do you do about it? But let's continue to drag our listener through the glass and all the risks associated
Uh,
with quantum. So we
yeah.
we talked about a couple of technologies that people use every day that would be impacted by this Q day, this discovery of or advancement in quantum computing that could affect our cherished asymmetric protocols. Um, I wanted to kind of bucket them because there's a lot of different technologies. So I was thinking about how some of these have to do with authentication standards, like breaking two-factor authentication or cracking passwords. Some of them have to do with the data in motion, so the confidentiality of data, like the VPN tunnels or your TLS channels. And then the third one I mentioned, but if you could just sort of dig into a little bit more, is harvest now, decrypt later. Why
Mhm.
is that a tactic that works with this particular problem?
So we don't know whether it will work. That depends on us actually developing quantum computers that can decrypt this stuff. I believe that's a foregone conclusion, but some people, as I said, argue that.
Mhm.
So let's say you and I are in different states. I'm red, you're blue. Okay, so I'll be the bad guy, I guess. And we have a rivalry, and I have secrets, and you have secrets. One of my secrets is the list of deep mole agents I have in your country. And I share that information over encrypted channels, VPNs, encrypted documents. You break into one of my networks and you steal a whole bunch of encrypted data, but it's encrypted and you have the key, the public key, but you can't get the private key. So you're stymied. You can't do anything with it. You could just throw it away, but maybe you'll save it for a rainy day and say, well, this is valuable information because these agents might be in place, these informants, these spies, these traitors on my side. I consider them heroes. You consider them spies.
Mhm.
Their names and what they're doing is very important to me, even years from now. So I'm going to hold this all on the side. I'm going to get the keys, because they're public. And with that public key and with that encrypted data, I'm going to like hold on to it and see what happens. And 5 years goes by, and you and your government are doing research on quantum computers as well, and you develop a quantum computer capable of decrypting them. You're probably not going to announce that. That's the other thing about encrypt, store now, decrypt later, is if the US government or the Chinese government, the Russian government, or any government gets a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, they're going to use it. They're not going to advertise it. Now, if Google or Microsoft or QEra or any of these other companies, they get one, they're going to announce it, and everybody's
Mhm.
going to know about it, and the game is afoot. But we don't know what's going on in these governments. I think that a commercial company will have these breakthroughs before a government, because the commercial companies are, quite frankly, spending more than I think it's possible for the countries to be spending. And
Mhm.
they're also synergizing in ways that you can't do when you're doing a secret project. So the impact is secrets that last a long time. So I was an infantry officer in the first Gulf War. And so I think of military terms quite often. In fact, I'm here visiting Fort Bragg. My classmate from West Point, Andrew Pappas, is a four-star general, and I'm sitting at his desk. Um,
That's cool.
so I had to get that in. But I think about military applications. And so the missile locations, the lists of spies and informants, the human intelligence resources, those are all critically long-lived secrets. There's shorter life secrets, like I'm going to fire my artillery shells and I'm going to encrypt the location, not so that you can't know what it is in 5 years. You're going to know in 2 minutes where it is, but I don't want you to like be able to start moving assets in the next 2 minutes before the shells land. So there's short-term encryption. I just need it for this transaction. And there's long-term encryption. I need to protect this wallet. I mean, think about the founder of Bitcoin's wallet is billions and billions of dollars. If you could break it, you could get it, right?
Mhm.
Especially if the FBI would be on you in a second, probably to one, identify you as the owner or arrest you as a thief. But that doesn't affect Iran and other states. So there is definitely a threat that this is a powerful tool in the nation states in the geopolitical battle. And I'm sure the United States is doing it as well. If the United States does offensive operations, which I would be, I have no proof of it, but I think it's very likely. We're probably doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's a awesome segue into the next topic I wanted to cover, which is the geopolitical context of this issue.
Hmm.
And the reason this bears on cybersecurity, you might think this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but I think it's important because from a threat intel perspective, security operations analysts have to think about the geopolitical context of their situation. If you're a SOC analyst in Israel right now, you have a particular threat in mind, and there's probably an increase in attacks from your Iranian
Yes.
counterparts. So
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning the geopolitical context of Q Day. And my question for you is this the next atom bomb?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a big one. It depends on how prepared everyone is. So if companies do what we're going to recommend at the end, then it can be the same as Y2K, a
Hmm.
nothing burger. Yeah, was Y2K a big deal? Yes, it was. I believe if we hadn't spent the time and money to prepare for it, it would have been a much bigger deal. But it wasn't, because we saw it coming, we dealt with it. Just like in the movie Armageddon, if we saw an asteroid coming and we could mine it with nukes and blow it up, we would. We're very good at seeing those threats coming and dealing with them. It always seems like we're going to wait till the last minute, and we usually do, but we usually solve them. This is going to be a big deal. This is going to be as big a deal as AI is right now,
Hmm.
because AI, of course, has become. And some people would have asked the same question about AI, a year ago. Is this the new nuke? And it might be. Um, I think that quantum is going to enable a lot of things outside of fixing the security problem. But, and those are good things: material science, medicine, helping AI. I believe that we're going to see quantum occupying our headspace to the same extent AI is now in some future year, whether it's 10 years from now or 5 years from now. But this issue is really where it hits geopolitics and security. And I believe that this is why there hasn't been a winter of quantum exploration, because governments are like, we cannot be caught flat-footed with this. We
Hmm.
cannot allow it. And so with AI, we saw dips in the funding and in the enthusiasm cycle as we got to where we are now. We're not seeing that nearly as much in quantum because this threat, this the brakes going out threat is sustaining the interest more, and that's why we're getting all this research, I think. I don't know if I went off topic too much there. Did I answer your question?
Totally. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
the geopolitical context and the fact that you mentioned earlier that you think if a nation state discovers or has breakthroughs in quantum mechanics and is able to apply it to this encryption problem, they'll keep it secret and
Yeah,
they'll use it for this harvest now, decrypt later approach. And you mentioned if a publicly traded company finds out, how to has a breakthrough in this technology, they're going to announce it to the world because they want to sell a lot of stuff.
exactly. Right.
So
Right.
that kind of addresses my question about, is this the next atom bomb? Because I was thinking, will this Q day come with a bang? Like, will tomorrow all of a sudden the lights start flickering and oh shoot, somebody solved the quantum problem?
I think
And
it just depends on what country you live in.
yeah, exactly. Or is
Um,
it going to be a low and slow thing? And again, going back to my threat intel perspective, if I was working in a large financial organization and I just started seeing a lot of incidents that that were really unusual, like how did that particular database get decrypted or something like that?
yeah.
Um,
I
I might start to think like maybe this has already happened and I'm living in a post-quantum world
I
already.
think if we get to the point where it's not a public thing, it's one of the countries that have developed it, like the United
Hmm.
States, China. United States and China really are the front runners, but England, Finland, all these countries are playing in the space. But if I were to expect a country to do it, remember the Enigma back from World War II. So history is very, very rife with examples. Churchill had a very tough decision. He knew they were going to firebomb Coventry. He knew they were going to destroy a civilian sector. And if he reacted to it, he would give away the fact that they had broken the codes. So he didn't. And he allowed Coventry to be bombed. And they say that Dresden was bombed in retaliation, firebombed in retaliation of that. This same thing would happen here. If the United States had a quantum computer, I believe, the United States government had a quantum computer capable of breaking RSA 2048, they would keep it secret as long as possible because you get
Hmm.
to read the other side. You'd know when they're about to make a breakthrough in quantum computers. You'd know when they're sending an arms shipment. And as long as you don't tip your hand, you have a huge advantage in intelligence. And I don't think anybody's going to waste that. They'd try to preserve it as long as humanly possible. So
Got
I,
it.
I don't think it'll be used for mundane things like stealing crypto wallets unless some hacking syndicate does it, and I think the odds of that is vanishingly small. I think
Yeah, very low.
it's going to be
Yeah.
Google or Apple or Amazon or Microsoft or one of those big players or one of these other Western. That's the advantage. Geopolitically, I wouldn't want to be outside of the West on this side of this fight because so many of the companies are Western and very few of them are Chinese, Russian, or Iranian, North Korean. I don't think there's any in North Korea. So if I had to bet, I think it was Jimmy the Greek said, the race is not always to the strong, nor the fight is not always to the strong, nor the race to the swift, but that's the way to bet.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so what's interesting, and last geopolitical thing, unless you want to dig deeper, is it apparently is that the Chinese seem to be behind in every aspect of quantum computing except quantum communication.
Hmm.
And my theory on that is that the Chinese have made a very good living off of stealing information from others and cracking other people's communications. And so their primary concern is making sure nobody does that to them. And so there's been a lot of, they've shown superiority in that field
Hmm.
uh, at times, but not in any other field, not in any other aspect. Are they nipping at our toes, at our heels? Probably. But we also now have DARPA, and I'm not going to get the acronym right, but DARPA funds research that helps the US military in its future wars. And DARPA identified Microsoft among a couple of other players as ones to watch that might disrupt the slow boil of things. and may actually enable us to sprint ahead. And Google just had an announcement where they said they've made a big breakthrough in error encryption, and in 2028 they're going to have a new chip. I don't remember how many qubits, but it's moving. Things are moving along.
Yeah. And I was planning on plugging your podcast at the end of this,
Thank
but
you.
I'll mention it now. Entangled Things is an excellent resource for the latest and greatest in developments. You have a couple of episodes at the beginning about the, superposition and quantum entanglement and how all of this impacts the science of quantum computing.
Hmm.
So strong recommendation to go check out Entangled Things. And
Thank you.
that'll helps shed some more light on those topics. Um, you Going back to the geopolitical context and the risks and the fact that, maybe we already have a quantum computer capable of cracking encryption, and maybe China's, nipping at our heels, as you put it. So what do you do about it? Let's spend a little bit of time on first, let's talk about quantum safe encryption. And
Hmm.
first of all, does that require a quantum computer? If I,
No, it does not. It
okay,
absolutely does not. That's the beauty of it. So there's two ways to go, and the question was very well placed. Let's talk about the hard way that we're not going to do first, and then we'll talk about the easy way. Bad news before good news. So there is a field of research called quantum key distribution, QKD, and that is to use a quantum system to generate bits that are purely random, that are not pseudo random, they are random, and then exchange those bits in a public forum in such a way that I know whether someone has eavesdropped on it or not.
yes. Can we just dig
Okay.
into the science of this? I know you
I
said
would
some
love to. I'd
disbelief,
love to.
but
So,
I think this
so
is the coolest.
So there's different protocols for it. BB84 is the first one, and then there was another one that came out in 91, and of course 91 is in the name. But let's talk about BB84. It's very simple when you understand it. And again, the quantum weirdness. So let's say you and I want to have a conversation. We want to share a file. Well, we need a key to share that file, and it needs to be a symmetric key. So we need to share that symmetric key. Well, we need to do that in public. Well, that's what RSA does, and Diffie-Hellman and elliptical curve. But let's say that the world has already passed the point where a quantum computer can break those things. So we're going to use QKD, quantum key distribution. So what happens is either some mitigator in the middle or one of us will take two bits, probably photons, because we're doing communications, and entangle them so that they have a spooky relationship that works at a distance. And what's
Yes.
going to happen is I'm going to send one to you, take one for myself, and you and I are going to measure them in a random way. And that is, we're either going to measure the what do you call it when you have glasses on? The polarity. The
Yeah.
polarity of the photon that you get, you're going to measure it either rectilinearly or diagonally. And I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm just going to flip a coin to figure out which way I'm going to do it. And I'm going to note that the first one I did rectilinear, the second one I did diagonally, then I did diagonally, then rectilinear. And I'm just going to write them all down. And I'm going to test all the bits as they come. And you're going to do the same thing. And we're going to do 1,000 bits, right? So now we're then going to reveal to each other how we measured each of them. And if you picked rectilinearly and I picked rectilinearly, then what we've done is we know, because of quantum entanglement and quantum mechanics, that they are correlated. Meaning, if you got a 0, I got a 1. Oh,
Hmm.
if I got a 1, you got a 0. They are absolutely correlated.
And the reason for that is these two particles are entangled, meaning
Yes.
if I spin one, yours spins in the same way or in the opposite way.
Opposite way. We,
Opposite
we
way, yeah.
normally talk about it like it's the same way, just to not to simplify it a little bit, but it really is opposite. So
It's
what we may
opposite.
say is, since you're sending the photons, whatever you pick is the right bit. So if you get a 1, we're going to use a 1. If I get a 0, we're going to use your 1.
And what's
Okay.
fancy about this is we're sort of communicating without sending a message
We're just sending
through
bits.
through any
Yeah.
medium other than this maybe quantum weirdness, this action at
Well,
a distance.
we do have to, you do have to get the photon. I do have to like use a fiber optic cable to get the photons. But
Okay.
here's the big magic. Let's say so in Alice and Bob, Eve is always the bad guy, is the
Hmm.
eavesdropper, right? Eve the eavesdropper. So if
I named my first daughter after Eve.
oh,
It's
nice. She's the bad guy, I guess, in this
yeah.
this story. Sorry about that. But it turns out that if you and I measure the polarity of the photons differently, it breaks the connection. The connection doesn't hold. So if I do diagonally and you do rectilinearly, there's no correlation. It's just you'll
Mm,
randomly get a one or a zero. I'll randomly get a one and a zero. No correlation. So
mm,
what happened is we shared the bits, shared the qubits. We measured them randomly. No, we didn't agree ahead of time because somebody could figure out how we were going to measure them. And then we compared notes. Well, let's say the odds are 50-50 that we measured the same way. We keep the ones we measured the same way. We throw out all the rest. Which with what's left, we exchange some of them. I got one for number 16. You confirm you got the same one just to see what the error rate is.
mm.
If the error rate is higher than expected, someone's eavesdropping and someone's been reading our qubits. So we
Yeah.
drop the conversation and we do it again some other time, or we use a different channel. If the if the error rate is sufficiently low, we have a secret code, a secret binary that we can use as a key, and then we can encrypt the files and we know what the key is ourselves. That's quantum key distribution. And it
Right.
is eavesdrop proof mathematically because of entanglement, because of this correlation. The thing is, if Eve gets my qubit and reads it and tries to recreate it, they can't. You can't clone a qubit. That's the beauty of it. It can't be copied. There's no photocopying. It's not like a classical bit where I can make as many copies as I want. A qubit, and
Mm,
that's what makes it hard to deal with. Uh, Um,
right.
so that is QKD, quantum key distribution, and it will come eventually, and there are implementations of it. And like I said, the Chinese are they're pretty advanced in that. I would say they're probably in some points in time they're the leader. Okay,
Hmm.
because they're very paranoid about that. But we don't need to resort to quantum computers to protect against them. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, took it upon themselves, because that's what they do, to come up with the next standard that is quantum safe, the next standard of asymmetric encryption. And so they started with like 60 protocols and they winnowed it down to just a few. And the fun names for the ones that won were Crystals Dilithium and Crystals Kyber. And then there's
Nice.
also a couple of others that made it in, and they're still testing some. But the reason those were fun is because Crystals Kyber is the crystal used in Star Wars lightsaber, and Crystals Dilithium is the crystals that are used by Star Trek's warp core engine, and that was fun. But they've renamed them now. So now Crystals Kyber is now named ML Chem, which Chem, KEM, stands for Key Encapsulation Mechanism. So it's very boring. But anyways,
Mm,
these mechanisms, let's stick with the crystals ones just for the sake of brevity. The crystals model is geometric. It no longer depends on the discrete log problem. It depends on you creating a matrix in a crystal structure mathematically, not in real life. So let's say I create a crystal structure of 2, 2. That would be a two-dimensional crystal structure where every um, point with two even numbers is on the crystal. So that means 2, 2 is on the crystal, 0, 0 is on the crystal, -2, 15 is on the crystal. Not 15, 16 would be on the crystal. 15 wouldn't be on the crystal because it doesn't match. Now,
right.
I'm using a two-dimensional crystal, but you'd use a 100-dimensional crystal or a 1,000-dimensional crystal, which is much harder to envision or manipulate. And then I'd pick a point not on the crystal, and we'd look at the nearest vector to one of the points, and that would be the key. But I would
Right.
introduce errors into my numbers that I release, just small enough to screw up someone guessing, but small enough to be factored out by someone who actually knew the numbers or knew what they were looking for.
Oh, wow, fascinating. So this protocol would actually require sending fake key material?
It's always a little bit faked. They jiggle the material a little bit so that if you're doing guessing, it you won't find it unless you know how to adjust it. It's called
Uh-oh.
learning with errors.
That sounds a little bit like security through obscurity, but it
A
sounds
little
like,
bit, but it's an infinite space. And so
yeah.
therefore, so if you're doing a brute force, you can't really you can't really solve the problem. The way it's presented in most explanations is imagine quadratic equations, which I think I've lost some of the audience already, where you have 4x squared plus 5y cubed plus that kind of number,
Yeah.
where I add a number to it. I add a 1 or 3 or I subtract 2. Well, that's going to throw off the problem. It's not going to solve anymore. But
Mhm.
if I only wiggle it a little bit and you actually know the key, then you can solve it right away because you just factor that in, and we do a mechanism that kind of like a centrifuge that kind of clears out that error. It makes it
Mhm.
negligible. But when you're trying to solve it as a brute force, you don't have the time to do that for every point. And so it
Mhm.
makes the problem infinitely harder. And that's one of the magics of it. So crystals is a very powerful geometric based encryption that has nothing to do with quantum, except we haven't found a way for quantum to break it. And so therefore we consider it quantum safe.
Got it. Okay, so there is post-quantum crypto available. It doesn't require a quantum computer. Um, so that the first step in what do we do about it? We have encryption standards.
We do.
What's the you mentioned earlier coming up with an inventory. What's the purpose or the value of creating an inventory of of your assets and
So
the encryption that's used for
So
them?
I'll give you another analogy. Okay, let's say let's say you have a home with many rooms, a single family or a multifamily home with furniture and accoutrements and closets, and we find out that a specific kind of screw is radioactive. Which Where is it used? I don't know. It's not listed anywhere. It's not like this dresser comes with a list of all the screw types it uses, right? So we could use a Geiger counter, but let's say that's not an option. How would you figure it out? You'd have to inventory what each of my products that I use, my blender, my desks, my drawers, the doors I buy, the whole house. I would have to inventory them to see what they were built with, which is not easy to find. You gotta go interrogate the builder, you gotta go talk to the manufacturer, and then I would say, okay, well, I have some of those screws in this dresser, and there's some in that door, and there's some over here in the patio furniture. And then I'm going to work with the vendor to get me to fix it, so to recall and fix those screws.
Hmm.
Same thing for all your software and all your desktop solutions and everything. Where are they using asymmetric encryption? And they may not even know. The vendor may not know where they're doing it. So there's programs that you can use that will watch your network and see the telltale signs and say, oh, this one's using it. You can also work with your vendors and say, we want to talk about your roadmap and how you're doing quantum safe encryption. And they may say, well, here's our plan. Use this upgrade to this product and you're good to go. And others will say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And hopefully they'll
Hmm.
listen to this podcast. They'll say, go listen to Shawn Murphy. He'll tell you what's going on in this space. But
Yes.
so the arduous task is the fact that software bill of materials, a list of everything that's been included, was brought to the surface when we had the Log4j debacle a couple of years
Yeah.
back. Log4j was a library that a lot of developers used for logging, and it was just a little component. It's like a screw put into a vanity. No one thought about it, but if you had it built into the vanity, it gave you a vulnerability, right? It
Mhm.
caused it caused mercury poisoning or whatever analogy, horrible analogy we want to come up with. So now there's a mode. MITRE Group has a framework for developing SBOMs. There's commercial products starting to come out. So we're starting to solve that problem. Well, the good news is that can be used in some cases to get this inventory as well. But it's not easy, it's not quick, and you should have started last month.
Yeah. So you need an inventory, and you also need to think about that in a sort of critical manner because there could be side channel attacks.
Yes.
You might know that a particular application is using RSA encryption, but maybe there's a way to circumvent that
Hmm.
encryption. So although you fix the main problem, there's a side channel
Yeah.
for monitoring the application, or there's downgrade attacks, which are super common even today, where you take the state-of-the-art encryption standard and then you tell the system that you're communicating with, hey, I can't speak that language. Let's use, whatever, some other hashing algorithm that's easy to break with
Exactly.
conventional computers.
Well, You mentioned something very interesting, side channel attack. This is at
Yeah,
early days. There's going to be growing pains, and we have to watch out for those growing pains, and we can't anticipate them. So the sooner you get involved in this, the sooner you're going to find those road bumps. But the first step is to get smart on this topic, to know it's a topic, to know that your brakes are going to fail someday. And I think this podcast and other channels like this is a great way. So I think it's a great idea for people to get themselves educated. And again, you don't need to know all the math. You don't need to understand the quantum. There's a saying that if you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. So if you actually think you know how it works, either get your Nobel Prize or accept that you're on the wrong track.
that's funny. Well, I think that's a great place to end the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Patrick Hynds. I know there's a ton that we can cover, and we'd love to have you back at some point to dig
Anytime.
into to the other elements of quantum. But just a quick plug for you and your company. I already mentioned Entangled Things, the podcast. Um, I forgot to mention at the top of the show that you're the CEO of one of our technology partners, Pulsar Security,
Hmm.
and Pulsar has offerings that help with this quantum problem and can help consult on how to build that SBOM and how to build the inventory and some
Yep.
risks to think about. And we leverage you heavily with many of our customers today
Yeah.
for red teaming and pen testing exercises.
Yep.
Um,
My
Anything
main
else to
side,
say in
my
closing?
Well, you brought it up. The actual 90% of my life is cyber
Yeah.
and pen testing and hacking, and I started the company over 30 years ago, so in its original form. But quantum is a passion because it also touches on cyber, and so while we don't have quantum products at the moment, other than what you've mentioned, our primary purpose at Pulsar Security is helping people stay secure. So, and we love working with WEI. You guys have been great to work with, and I'm very grateful for you bringing me on your podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, just in closing, this is the WEI Tech Talk podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Murphy. Thanks again, Patrick, for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.